What's up YouTube? Let's talk about some computer myths today. Let's start. So guys, before we start our video, I would like to request you all to go and subscribe to our channel and press that bell icon so that you get notified about our next videos. Now, let's just quickly talk about some of the myths that have been there in the market for a very long time now. And the myths that I'm going to talk about are basically things that I've heard a lot of people around me speaking or talking about. And the way I'm going to speak about this is basically in very simple terms, so that for those of you who don't understand very technical terms can still follow what I'm going to say. So myth number one, adding more RAM to your system is going to make it run faster. Now this is completely untrue. This is completely false, and the reason for that is most of the systems that we have today in the market, or most of the systems that we own, actually have anywhere from 8 GB RAM to 16 GB of RAM. Unless your system is running ridiculously low amount of RAM like 2 GB or 4 GB, then it kind of makes sense to go and add RAM. However, I still think if your system is running about 2 GB or 4 GB of RAM, it must be a pretty old computer, and guys, it's time to change your computer. So adding more RAM to that system is not going to make any sense. However, what I really want to emphasize here is the amount of RAM that's required inside your computer is completely dependent upon the kind of workload that you do. So if you're just a simple user who's just using his computer to surf the internet, watch some YouTube videos, watch Netflix, send emails, type on Microsoft Word or whatever be it, you probably are not going to need anything more than 16 GB of RAM. In fact, even 8 GB of RAM is more than sufficient. And a lot of people think that if they add 8 GB RAM or 16 GB of RAM, the system is going to run faster. Well, it's not going to do, because your system already has enough RAM that it needs to run perfectly. In fact, your system could be running slower due to so many other reasons, like the thermal paste must have dried up, there's not sufficient airflow inside your computer, your cooling solution is not effective, your hard drive must be getting full, and so on. I mean, like, there's so many other reasons. So guys, just hear it out. Adding more RAM to your computer is definitely not going to make it run any faster. Myth number two, adding an AMD GPU with an AMD CPU or pairing an AMD GPU with an AMD CPU is going to perform better in games. Now this is completely not true. Now you have to understand this. There are two things. Number one, the performance of your game is going to be dependent upon the kind of graphic card that you use, irrespective of the fact whether you take a card from Nvidia or you take a card from AMD. It is not going to matter which brand it is, but it's just going to depend upon how good that graphic card is going to be. The second thing is, the performance of your game is going to depend upon at what kind of resolution are you going to play with whatever graphic card that you have. And the third most important thing, or in fact I would call this to be the second thing, and that is for what platform or for what architecture has the game being optimized for. Now if you buy an AMD GPU or a Nvidia GPU, they would perform completely different on a lot of different games. The performance of these games, besides the kind of hardware that you're using, or let's say both of them are from the same class or from the same tier of cards, they are going to perform pretty differently on a lot of these games. And the reason is because these games have been optimized to work differently or perform better in one of the architectures as compared to the other. For example, there are games which have been optimized to run better on AMD graphic cards. There are games which have been optimized to run better on Nvidia graphic cards. So basically, it just doesn't matter what graphic card are you pairing to an AMD CPU or an Intel CPU if we are talking about the same tier of cards. And it is completely going to be dependent upon as to how this game has been optimized to run on a certain architecture. Now, before you go and buy a graphic card, you need to go and understand what kind of games are you going to play, and are these games specifically optimized for a certain architecture. In my opinion, or in my experience, I have not had a huge difference between these games performing very differently on both these different GPUs. For example, if I play F1 2019 on an AMD GPU at 1440p resolution, I get somewhere around 150 to 160 frames per second. If I play the same game on NVIDIA GPU, I get near about 150 to 155 frames per second, depending upon what resolution I am playing on, or what settings I'm playing on, to be very precise. And I think that it has really not made much of a difference when you compare these two cards. So I mean, it just doesn't matter what graphic card do you actually pair to your AMD CPU or to your Intel CPU. I mean, in the end, the result is going to be pretty much the same, unless you really want to stick with one architecture, which is AMD, when you're building your system. That kind of makes sense, but don't buy an AMD GPU thinking that it's gonna perform better than an NVIDIA GPU when paired up with an AMD CPU. Myth number 3. This is the myth which a lot of people have actually spoken to me about, especially when they're building a new system, and that is adding a higher wattage PSU or power supply unit inside a computer is actually going to fry up your components. Now, this is so untrue. People who go on telling you that this can happen are really the people who don't understand how PSU works. None of the PSUs in the market till date are actually pushing the power to the various components inside your computer. It's basically all the components which are there inside your computer which draw power from your PSUs. So it's basically the whole concept is, when you're driving a car and you don't press that gas pedal, your car is not going to run any faster on its own. You have to press that gas pedal. PSUs work almost in the same principle. Until and unless the components start drawing more power from the PSU is not going to push any extra power by itself. As a matter of fact, PSU is just going to deliver, or just going to output, the exact amount of power that your components is actually pulling it from. So it's as simple as that. PSUs don't push power, it's the components that draw power, and that is why having a higher wattage PSU is definitely not going to fry up any kind of components inside your system. Now, speaking about PSUs, this brings us to myth number 4, which again is related to PSU, and that is leaving the cables coming out of the PSU not managed inside your computer case can actually restrict the airflow. Now, that is extremely not true, and the reason for that is the amount of cable that comes out of your PSU, even if you fold it or you kind of make it into a ball and just place it behind your case fans, they just don't have enough surface area to block all the air that's being pulled inside the system, and thus it just cannot kind of block the air which is passing inside the computer. So in short, these cables, because they don't have enough surface area to block all the air, they kind of don't restrict the airflow, and which, I mean, like, if anybody has told you that leaving these cables inside your system unmanaged or just lying around can restrict the airflow, that is completely false. As a matter of fact, if you guys search on YouTube or on Google, you will find a lot of people who have made videos specifically on this topic. Myth number 5. A lot of people, when they sell their old computers, they tend to format their hard drives at least 2 or 3 times and then reinstall Windows, thinking that hard formatting has actually deleted everything from their computer and the data cannot be recovered. Well, this is a complete myth. If you guys go online right now and Google data recovery software, you'll find so many softwares that are available for download, and you can actually recover the data. You could perhaps actually recover the data as we are speaking now. If some of you have already formatted your drive and you're planning to sell off your computer, you can actually try this. Go to Google, search for data recovery software, download one of these softwares and try recovering the data. You'll find that most of the data that you might have deleted probably 3 years or 4 years ago, or if you would have bought this drive from someone else, you could actually recover the data that was there inside that drive, which was already deleted when the drive was given to you. So I mean, this is a very big misconception. A lot of people don't understand this, and they are so careless that I have seen people who have got into huge troubles wherein they've got so many private files, private photographs inside their drives, and when they have sold the computer, somebody else has actually recovered those data and have had these guys given them a very tough time. So I mean, yeah, I mean, this is something that you guys should always remember. Hard formatting your drive is just going to delete the data from it, or it's going to format your drive to the extent that you can't physically see the data that's there, but then again it's there inside the drive. And using certain data recovery softwares, you can actually recover those data. So when you're selling your computer next time, or you're about to sell your computer, make sure you don't sell your drive unless you are absolutely sure that there was nothing personal inside the computer that you don't want others to see. Myth number 6: if you want to have a gaming computer, everything inside your computer should be from the gaming series, like the motherboard, the RAM and everything. Now let me tell you something. Gaming motherboard, gaming RAM, these are all marketing gimmicks. There is nothing called gaming motherboard or gaming RAM. In fact, a motherboard which doesn't have gaming written on it can still game, provided it's paired with a CPU which is actually going to process all the data. And I mean, it is so kind of funny that people, just because they want to buy something which has written gaming all over it, they go and spend so much of money. So in case you're going to go and build yourself a gaming computer, you just go ahead with any motherboard that fits inside your budget. Make sure whatever CPU you have decided to buy, the CPU can actually fit onto that motherboard and it can perform it can function properly. There's nothing that you need or there's nothing which is called a gaming motherboard that you would actually need to game. And in fact, I plan to do a video wherein I'm going to take a motherboard which doesn't say gaming, which is a very basic motherboard, and again I'm going to take a motherboard which says gaming, and I'm going to put the same CPU inside both of these motherboards under completely same setup, and I'm gonna run a game, and I'm gonna show you guys that there's absolutely no difference whatsoever while you're gaming. I mean, there's no difference. It's basically your CPU and the GPU that's doing all the processing. So you actually do not need something which says gaming, especially when it comes to RAM or when it comes to a motherboard. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So it's a complete myth when people tell you, or when you go out and you're planning to buy some components for your computer, and the retailer there or the shopkeeper tells you that, you know, if you are building a gaming setup, you need a gaming motherboard or you need a gaming RAM. This is all completely a marketing gimmick. Do not fall for these, and just buy something which fits in your budget. The next myth that I'm going to talk about here is about overclocking. A lot of people think that overclocking your system can actually damage it. Now, this is not completely untrue. This is true to a certain extent if you really don't take care of the temperatures. Now, overclocking is all about maintaining good temperatures for higher frequencies at lower voltages. So you would want to run your system at a higher frequency with a relatively low voltage so that your temperatures are down. The more voltage you put inside your component, the more heat it's going to generate, the hotter it's going to run. And most of the systems, they get damaged only because of heat. And that's why I always tell people that even when you are building your system, you should have a case which has an excellent airflow, so that all that excess heat can be pushed out of your computer. Now, overclocking, a lot of people, when they overclock, they actually tend to look aside their cooling solutions. Most of them are really bothered about touching higher frequencies, even at the cost of, pushing a higher voltage. And that is something which you should be really wary of. If you have your voltages which are running pretty low and your temperatures are running pretty low, the rate at which the silicon inside your chip is going to degrade again is not going to speeden up. And to be fair to all the silicon manufacturers, every silicon or every component inside the computer, which includes this one which is right behind me, this again, if I run it daily, the silicon quality is going to degrade, and the silicon quality is going to degrade over a period of time, and it's not going to degrade in a day or two. It's going to take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And if you overclock your system and you get higher frequencies and you get better performance out of it, even for 5 years or 6 years, and that is when your computer starts to degrade, say for example, you are not at loss, because most of us are, kind of upgrading our hardwares, or we usually tend to change our hardware, or we tend to upgrade our systems, or we tend to buy new systems every 4 to 5 years. There are people who do it in 7 years. That's absolutely fine. Even if you change your computer in 7 years, your computer is not going to degrade, or in fact your chip inside your computer, which has been overclocked properly, is not going to degrade to the extent that you actually can't use your computer. So in short, if you are overclocking your system, if you take care of the temperatures, if you take care of the voltages, if you take care of the frequencies by not being too aggressive on them, your system is going to degrade at a normal pace. And again, you can use that computer for 5 years or 7 years, whatever that may be. So I rest this case here. You guys decide whether this is a myth or not. But in my opinion, if you have everything under control, it is not necessarily that your system is going to degrade once you have overclocked your system. Myth number 8. Having an AIO or a custom liquid cooled PC is going to run your computer cooler at all times under all conditions. Now, this is where the myth is, at all times under all conditions. Now, this is something which you should be really wary of. If your computer is kept inside a room which doesn't have proper ventilation, or it doesn't have the air conditioning, your system is definitely going to get hot. And the reason for that is that because you have AIO or custom liquid cooled solution installed inside your computer, it's being more efficient in the terms of dissipating all that heat into the outer atmosphere, or into the outer air, or into your room. Now, when this happens, your room temperature is going to go up. When your room temperature is going to go up, your computer again is going to take that hot air and again going to push it inside your case, which again is going to make your components run hotter. And over a period of time, even AIOs can tend to fail if hot air is constantly being pushed inside it, because it loses its efficiency. And this is something which you guys should really be wary of. If you have an AIO or you have a custom liquid cooled PC, make sure you place this computer inside a room which has proper ventilation, or at least has air conditioning. Otherwise, it's not going to help you in any way. And thus, when people say this, that having an AIO inside your computer or having custom liquid cooled PC setup, it's always going to run cooler, or under all circumstances at all places, they probably tend to forget this particular point. So guys, be wary of this. The next myth I want to talk about here is basically when people say that inside custom liquid cooled PC you should have a radiator between two components. And this they say because they feel that by doing this, the temperature of certain components can be lower. Now, when people say this, they simply don't understand that the temperature of the loop inside your computer, in case of custom liquid cooled PC, is actually controlled by the amount of surface area that your radiator has. The thicker the radiator, the more surface area, the more heat it can dissipate. And over a period of time, what would happen is that say suppose you use your computer for about an hour or so, and what's going to happen is the temperature of the whole loop is going to go to a break-even point. I mean, like, the whole loop would have the same temperature. Your CPU temperature, GPU temperature would be almost the same. It's going to depend upon your cooling of certain components is actually going to depend upon the kind of radiators or the thickness of the radiator or the surface area that you give the heat to dissipate, and not where the radiators are actually placed. And by this, what I mean is, you could have your reservoir directly shooting the water, pushing the water to your GPU. From GPU, it could directly go to CPU. From CPU, it could go to radiator 1, which could be pretty thick. Or in case you can't have a thicker radiator and you have two radiators, it can go from radiator 1 to radiator 2 and back to the reservoir. It's absolutely not going to make any difference in terms of temperature whatsoever when compared to a pump pushing the water to the GPU pushing the water to a radiator again pushing the water to a CPU, and CPU again pushing the water to radiator and back to the reservoir. So that's completely bogus. It's not going to make any difference. People who tell you that you should have a radiator between two components are basically the people who really don't understand how radiators actually work. Myth number 10, which is our final myth, and this myth is something which is pretty controversial, in the sense that a lot of people say that switching off your computer during night can actually harm your computer. Even though this is a known fact that most of the computers fail or they have some kind of hardware damage when the computer is just switched on for some weird reason, it is still advisable for your computer, for you to switch off your computer when you go back home or when you're going to sleep. And the reason for that is your computer can actually cool down for some time. You can save a lot of power. People are talking about going green, saving power, saving water and everything. So I think switching off your computer during night, it's it's a kind of myth, but it's not a complete myth. Now, I don't know how to explain this thing to you guys. The chances of your computer having go bad, or your hardware having some kind of damage when you switch on your computer every morning, is probably not even about 0.5%. So if you think 0.5% could actually count to reality, or you could actually call it a reality, well, that's for you to decide. But it's something which tells me 99.5% of the time that doesn't happen, I'm not really going to be worried about it. Your computer needs to rest, or at least if you're scared of switching off your computer during the night or before you go back home, just put your computer to sleep. Just let your computer hibernate. You're gonna save power, you're gonna make your computer rest. I mean, it's gonna cool down, the temperatures are going to be normal. When you come back in the morning and you start doing something in your computer will be nice and cool and ready for you. So yeah, I mean, point number 10 was pretty difficult for me to explain to you guys, and I don't know how clear was I when I was telling you guys. It's a kind of myth, but then again, it's not a myth. I don't know. However you see it, that's up to you. So guys, yeah, these were the 10 points which I really wanted to discuss with you guys, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like the video, as usual guys, press that like button, share it with your friends, and if you're not subscribed to our channel guys, please do consider subscribing. It's gonna be of a great help to us. And as usual guys, take care, stay happy, stay healthy, stay blessed. Until next time, it's Sajeev signing off. Bye bye.